collaboration with the Cyprus Mail. This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
Coming up this week, sometimes truth is about as strange as fiction. It's pantomime time.
The country is broke, the town is broke, and the mayor is building something that the town doesn't need.
Chocoholics are preparing for the second Nicosia Chocolate Festival.
We'll be having some chocolate and wine pairing seminars, and many participants will be creating some more special or more unique chocolate creations like chocolate ravioli.
And we'll hear from the UN Special Advisor for Cyprus, Espen Barth Eide.
I have none of this. Nobody's killing each other, which is great news. There are two parties, not many, two sides, and they're consistent over time, super consistent over time. They agree that they have a dispute, and they agree that they would like to solve it at the table. And they generally also agree that I should help them, and the UN, I and the UN and the international community should help them. And they have the Security Council all aligned to help them to solve that, which is unique in today's world, because the Security Council is normally not aligned on anything.
It's pantomime time again. Christmas, of course, is coming, and certainly in Nicosia, the celebrations very much get underway for the theatre-going population when the Anglo-Cypriot Theatre unveils its latest presentation. This year, it's going to be The Pied Piper of Hamelin, a pantomime that I think has not been done before in Cyprus. Graham Thomas plays the dame. Graham, tell us a little bit about the storyline, because it's not one that I associate very much with pantomime, although it is a well-loved story. How close does it stay to the actual storyline we know?
It sticks fairly close to it, to the story of Hamelin back in the 13th century. And basically it's a story where the country is broke, the town is broke, and the mayor is building something that the town doesn't need.
Goodness me.
Familiar?
Yes.
The town is full of dirty rats, and all there is poverty, corruption and embezzlement. So that's the story, the background. But the Pied Piper is brought in to get rid of the rats which are infesting the town of Hamelin. He gets rid of them. The mayor, Mr. Otto van Pumpernickel, refuses to pay, so he then takes the children away. And so the rest of us try to rescue the children.
But it's got all the usual pantomime ingredients, I take it, and the boos and the yells and the sweets.
Yes, it has the baddies and the goodies, the slapstick, songs, dancing, awful puns, local jokes. So it does follow the old tradition. Great costumes, great set. We're really looking forward to it.
I think everybody else is too, and it has become part of the sort of Christmas season here in Nicosia, with huge swathes of youngsters brought along by schools and their parents putting together even teams of kids plus all their friends. How difficult is it when you're on the stage and there are particularly large numbers of very young kids in the audience?
Two things. One, if they get over-exuberant, then it's a case of getting down amongst them, actually, and they tend to back a little bit when they see a pretty ugly dame making towards them. But otherwise, they don't get over-exuberant, because they're just looking at that stage, looking at these actors going back and forth in colourful costumes. I would say they don't get too noisy.
But a lot of grown-ups, of course, attend as well, especially on the evening performances, and that's where the double entendres and the local jokes come in. Do you have a preference for which audience you play to?
Not really. As you say, they're all different, and adults tend to come in the evenings, but even then, one evening can differ to the other. Some are quite noisy, some are not. So one has to judge the audience and react accordingly to them. But no, I love the kids on an afternoon show, and I love the adults in the evening, because it is different.
You've done away, have you, with the weekday performances?
Yes, the Friday performance. We have two performances this coming Saturday on the 6th at 3 o'clock and 7:30. One on the 7th on Sunday at 3. One on the 13th, the Saturday, at 7:30. and the final one on Sunday the 14th at 3 o'clock.
Graham Thomas, who plays the Dame in the Anglo-Cypriot Theatre's pantomime The Pied Piper of Hamelin. It's curtain up this weekend. You can get tickets if you email ticketsforact@gmail.com, call 97804 or you can get them between 4 and 6 p.m. Monday to Friday at the parish office of St Paul's Cathedral. £12 for adults, £6 for children under 12, just on the performances on the 6th and 7th of December.
You can subscribe to the Cyprus News Digest on iTunes for free and get the program downloaded to your phone or tablet so you can listen anytime, anywhere.
Well, Christmas, of course, means chocolate, and people in Nicosia have a chance to indulge themselves this whole weekend. It's the time of the second Nicosia Chocolate Festival, which is organised by Nicoleta Orfanou. Nicoleta, what gave you the idea for the Chocolate Festival?
Well, the idea came from many different places, actually. It wasn't something really specific. Chocolate and pastry is my passion and hobby other than my work, which is really different. And I've been visiting many chocolate festivals abroad during my studies, and I've always been into creating something which did not exist so far in our country. So I came back to Cyprus last year after I finished my studies in Prague, and working in the hospitals. I was a trainee doctor. I was seeing that, we had a lot of problems in Cyprus, and you get to see it everywhere. So in the hospitals, we were seeing a lot of cancer patients, actually, that they did not have a place to go. And this was a bit sad, and they told us that 3 of the rooms in Arodafnousa Center were closed down because they didn't have enough funds and money. So I thought, okay, I've really been interested in creating something nice and sweet like this. So why not creating it and donating the funds for these people, and at least helping as much as we can to reopen these rooms. So that's the whole idea about it. And I came in contact with a few pastry chefs in Cyprus, and I told them my idea. They were all really excited about it. We did not know what to expect, actually, because it was the first time.
That was last year. What did turn out? I mean, you had a lot of people, and it was very successful.
Well, we were glad to see all those people. In the end, it was our problem, let's say, that it was too many people coming in and there was not enough space, and actually few participants, they sold out even before the end of the festival.
So this year you've moved to bigger premises.
Yeah, much bigger premises, and it's a 2-day festival rather than 1-day festival. We're bringing some artists, some street artists from Portugal for a chocolate-themed show. We'll be having some chocolate and wine pairing seminars, and many participants will be creating some more special or more unique chocolate creations like chocolate ravioli or chocolate chili ice creams, and because we want it to be something more special, to create an experience, not just a visit.
The interesting thing, I mean, you're a doctor, is that chocolate, particularly, of course, dark chocolate, has come into its own as a health benefit. So over the last few years, people who love their chocolate don't actually need to feel guilty about it anymore, do they? Tell us about the health benefits.
Well, actually, I think everything needs to be done within a limit, because even wine is good, but if you drink too much wine, you're alcoholic. It's not a health benefit anymore. So they found out that dark chocolate, actually the actual substance of chocolate, cocoa, has some similar ingredients, if not exactly the same, with red wine that is good for the heart and blood pressure.
It's the flavonoids, I think, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which are cancer inhibitors as well, I believe.
Oh, well, no one can actually demonstrate it so far. There are so many things that we think, and we're trying to test if they are actually cancer inhibitors. But, they found that it's very similar, if not the same substance that is in red wine that is good for the heart. So dark chocolate has less milk. That means that has less fat, which makes it healthier. But still, I think people should eat everything in moderation.
A little bit of what you fancy does you good.
Yeah, actually, I love milk chocolate, so I'm not the right person to suggest.
So do tell us the details. It's all over this weekend. A €5 entry fee, I think. Whereabouts is it going to be held?
It's in Uni Cafe, the former Peugeot showroom in Engomi, very close to the roundabout of Kolokasidis. So it's a €5 entrance fee, and except the kids, of course, the kids are free because we love kids and the kids love chocolate. It's going to be from 11 in the morning until 8 during the night, and people can come at any time they like. They can enjoy their wines, some chocolate showpiece exhibitions actually. They can buy anything they want from the pastry chefs. They can have a look at everything, and we hope everyone had some fun. And at the same time, of course, we will be gathering this money to help the ones in need, because we are really happy. Last year, we managed to raise €5,000, which we donated, and they thanked us that they managed to reopen these 3 rooms. Of course, we were not the only ones that helped, but at least we felt that we did our part. So that's what we want to keep doing, offering people some happiness, and the ones that really need some support, we hope they get what they can.
So you can pig out on chocolate, probably buy some lovely yummy Christmas presents as well, and know that your entry fee is going to a very good cause. Nicoletta, thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
The Peace Research Institute of Oslo's annual conference took place at the end of last week. Entitled Conflict in Europe, Europe in Conflict, it looked at the changing nature of conflict in Europe and its neighbourhood. One of the keynote speakers was Espen Barth Eide, who is, of course, Special Advisor to the UN Secretary-General on Cyprus. This is what he had to say.
It's important for all of us, and not the least for the people of Cyprus, to try to put their own question, which they have been struggling with for many decades, into a broader perspective. One of the arguments I have been trying to make myself since I took up this job is that everything happens in a context, and the context that's currently dominating Europe and the world is that the 2014 political landscape is the most dramatic security landscape I have seen any time. Definitely after the Cold War, but I would probably even say including the Cold War, the part of it that I lived. I was born a few days before Anfisip, which means I'm 50. That also means that I lived exactly half of my life under the Cold War, and became an adult in the Cold War. Remember that very well. Was politically active, also then engaged in security-related studies and issues, and international politics on the party level. And then the other 25 years in a post-Cold War setting. And I'd like to add, before I go into more the Cyprus-specific issues, that as the Cold War ended, there were 2 sort of macro predictions of what would now happen that were seemingly in stark contrast to each other. It was the super optimistic vision, most famously presented as the end of history, where Francis Fukuyama said first in an article, and then people liked the article so much, so he said the same thing again in the book. But the argument was that we are now coming to the end of history in Hegelian sense. Not that the life of planet is over, quite to the contrary, but the competition between system is over, and the West won, and the liberal democratic model won, and that's it. And now we will just fix the rest. And the other prediction was that, I remember, for instance, one early article that came out early 1990, which we all read by an alternative researcher, John Mersheimer, who said we will soon miss the Cold War. And his argument, and that of many others, was that the Cold War had kind of put a lid on age-old conflicts, that the superpowers and the structures around the superpowers were containing a number of conflicts that were not any longer contained. So now we will open up to bloodshed and crisis all over the place, but particularly in the belt towards the east of Europe. Now, of course, these 2 extreme predictions were seemingly in complete opposition to each other. But 25 years later, I think we say they were both right. Or they both had an element of truth. We had many years of very successful globalization. And I remember that the way we were thinking of the world and Europe in the early 90s was that, in a sense, there was a competition between cosmos and chaos. Cosmos was the orderly world that was expanding through EU enlargement, NATO enlargement, but also the broadening up of what used to be the Western economic system. One of the triumphs of this model was, of course, China's entry into the World Trade Organization, where seemingly everybody came together in one orderly, structured world, the cosmos. And outside of cosmos was chaos, but we could fix chaos. I remember almost exactly 20 years ago, I went to a conference in Washington, which was called Managing the New World Disorder, or Managing Chaos. I think Managing Chaos was the book. And it was very typical of the time, because we knew it was chaos, but we will go out and fix it. So we would send peacekeeping missions and peace mediators around, people like me, and then we will go out on behalf of the world community and tell people that you should get the state together and you should have democracy and rule of law. And we had rule of law officers and democracy officers and gender advisors, and we will then sort of recreate or create a new model that would represent the view of cosmos on what the world should look like. So while we, of course, could observe that the 1990s was actually more violent than the 1980s, we did not see it as a bad omen. It was more like, unfortunately, not everybody got it. So they didn't get it in Rwanda, so they killed 800,000 people, and they didn't get it in the Balkans, so they needed some help. And eventually they would get it. And, for quite a while, this was proven right, because we had a number of successes within this paradigm. We were able, we got rid of apartheid in a reasonably orderly way. We were able to get Cambodia out of the total tragedy into something more stable. The Balkans eventually became peaceful, although there are big differences, and we still have lingering issues like the Bosnia constitution issue, which, by the way, I think we, the world community, has actively contributed to not solving the problem by perpetuating a model that cannot work. So in that sense, it's important to understand that these two predictions were actually not contrasts, but they were true predictions of a future that actually was happening. The other thing that we started to assume was that while we used to think of security as a symmetric issue, if you lived in the Soviet Union, you will see security as a competition with the West. If you lived, as I did, in Norway, you will see security as how to balance between West and East, against the Soviet Union. So security was about sort of the superpower competition and containing that superpower competition. Think about the Cuban Missile Crisis or the crisis over Berlin and so on. And then suddenly all that was gone. We thought all this was gone. And what came instead was asymmetric challenges. It was not any longer strong states that worked, but it was former states that broke up. It was state collapse, state weakness was the problem. When we were concerned about Bosnia, or when we later became very concerned about Afghanistan, it was not because it worked very well, it was precisely because it did not work. And that was what created the problem. Even in the 1990s, our view of Russia was that our biggest fear was not sort of a strong alternative Russia that was pressing us in any direction. It was the fear of a genuine collapse of the Russian state, which almost happened at the ruble crisis. And I used to say then, we used to fear Russian submarines that worked. Now we're fearing Russian submarines that do not work any longer, but are leaking nuclear material, so we have to go in with development aid to help them to clean up the nuclear material from their old submarines, which were built to bomb us with nuclear weapons. But so it's a total mental change. We're just beginning to realize that the world is now returning to a world of strategic competition. It's returning to a world where strong states are taking alternate positions, sometimes perfectly peacefully, or sometimes quite violently. We see examples in Ukraine, of course, which is obviously not about Ukraine, but about a much bigger competition about spheres of influence. We see it in East Asia, between China and Japan, and China and Vietnam and Philippines, and so on, about who's there to look after their interest in the South China Sea and the East China Sea. We see it in the Middle East, where we see both the general collapse continuing, but also strong states competing over the areas where their own state is collapsing. So we are now living in a sense in a world where we have strategic competition and asymmetry at the same time. That didn't make it any better. It's twice as bad, because in the Cold War we had basically symmetry, to be concerned about, and we had 20 years with asymmetry, and now we have both. And neither will go away. This is probably here to stay. Now this is kind of a slightly maybe gloomy picture of the world that it looks. The world is definitely not unipolar any longer. It's either multipolar or non-polar. And I think it's a little bit of both, because of course in certain aspects there are clearly defined interests that are competing, which would suggest multipolarity. But there are also another challenge, which is that nobody really carries the system. It's actually still the old players, the US, occasionally at good days the EU and some others who try to sort of carry the overarching system. But the new emerging powers are not yet ready. I hope they will be, but they're not ready to move beyond just looking after their immediate self-interest, and also looking after their self-interest in a more enlightened way, which is to help carry some global institutions. So it's been a very interesting inflection point, and into that come everything you all talked about, and of course also Cyprus. I think it's helpful if people and leaders and anybody engaged in Cyprus occasionally take some time to think about the bigger picture. Because with all due respect, there are more problems in the world than the Cyprus problem. And some of these problems actually appear to the rest of us as even more dramatic. For instance, the crisis in Syria has dimensions which are way beyond what the non-solution of the Cyprus problem. Some perspective is not bad. But I think it's also important for me to say that I think this is a particularly bad moment to maintain a non-solution. It's a particularly bad security landscape in the world, given everything from the total collapse of entire countries in the Middle East, the end of the state system that was introduced at the end of the First World War after the Ottoman Empire had fallen down, and where the victors were handing out states to tribes that allied with them, to finish the war and throw out the losing side. That system is actually collapsing. We haven't seen the worst yet. And this is close. This is happening in place that if you were a good swimmer, you could always swim to. So it's close to here. And it's also happening in a setting where the EU, as you very well illustrated, have their own internal dilemmas about whether it will go forward or backward on in which direction. And many new questions. And of course, the fact that Cyprus is a member of the EU, and the united federal Cyprus, when it comes, will be an EU member where all citizens will be equal members of citizens of a state that is an EU member, is highly relevant to all of this, and a very important guide in my work, because I, for instance, have to tell those who believe that there is room for significant derogation that I don't think so. I don't think any longer the EU is ready to stomach significant derogations, because the EU has to look after its own cohesion, and the EU is threatened by much bigger states leaving the Union. And I think what we're seeing, I'm not saying I know this, and it's not up to me to decide, but I think I'm observing a kind of get-together in the core, saying that we will have two-speed Europe, but from a key and up, not from a key and down. And that's an important framing to be aware of in the Cyprus context. So there are security arguments why one should not take status quo for granted. Many places have been stable, all until they were not stable any longer, and then negative dynamics can happen rather fast. But on the positive note, we're also in a situation here where there are enormous opportunities coming up right in front of you. Those of you from Cyprus. Enormous opportunities. You are probably on the verge of transiting into a hydrocarbons economy. I know what that is because I'm from Norway, and we experienced this from the 1970s onwards. It's a major transition, and it's not at all just about tax income. It's about fundamental change in what students want to study at university. It's about new questions about how to deconflict between other industries and this new allure of this industry. It's about looking after the environment so you don't undermine your tourism industry, because if you spoil your beaches, there will be less tourists. And tourists last longer than gas, because gas runs out, tourists will keep coming, as long as you have a clean beach, a good hotel, and a flight, and an airport, and nice people, and that's in good supply here. So that's sort of an endless resource, whereas gas and oil isn't. So all these issues are characters of what it is to become a hydrocarbons economy. And decisions made these very days will affect the life of all Cypriots in many years to come. Hopefully decades after unification. Which is why I think it's important to seriously think how this opportunity is used as an instrument for reunification, as an argument for solving the known political problems, rather and actually moving forward, rather than becoming an argument for not moving anywhere. Because I speak to people, and I speak to people who would like to talk, and I speak to people who do not want to talk, as you may have noticed. And then I am frequently asked, what do they think about this, or what do they think about that, and what will happen on property, what will happen on territory, how will we arrange the security, how we will deal with, with governance and power sharing. And my answer is, well, I have some ideas, but I don't know, because we're not at the table talking about it. I promise to come back and tell you when we've been through the negotiations, because that's the only place to find out. And I also want to tell you that I had a conversation recently with my boss, Ban Ki-moon, where I told him that if I compare my job to that of many of my colleagues who are sent to places which also has a crisis, like Syria or the Democratic Republic of Congo and Sudan, and you may perceive that their crisis is at least as big as the one I'm dealing with, they have a type of problem that I don't have, because they are typically trying to find the parties. One is typically quite clear, which is the government, although that's not only always clear who that is. And then there will be 1, 2, 3, 10 or many who are the other parties, and when you identify one, they split into more. The second problem is that there's a lot of violence happening right now, not 40 years ago, but right now. A lot of fresh blood, and fresh blood always means a desire for revenge, more hatred, more generational conflict, more small boys who vow to kill in the name of their dead mother or father, and so on, every time, everywhere in the world, in any culture. And if he or she finds the parties do not agree what the conflict is all about. They actually do not even agree whether they have a conflict, because typically the government will say there is no conflict here, and everybody else will say, well, there are many conflicts here, and they will have, Syria a good example. There are many candidates to say what the conflict is all about. I have none of this. Nobody's killing each other, which is great news. There are two parties, not many, two sides, and they're consistent over time, super consistent over time. They agree that they have a dispute, and they agree that they would like to solve it at the table. Not only that, they agree how they can organize the discussions into 6 chapters. There's a nuance right now on hydrocarbons, as again you may have noticed, but generally they agree on how to solve this. And they generally also agree that I should help them, and the UN and the international community should help them. And they have the Security Council all aligned to help them to solve that, which is unique in today's world, because the Security Council is normally not aligned on anything, but it is aligned on Cyprus. So I'm telling Ban Ki-moon, so they should envy me. But then he said, yeah, they should, he says, but they don't envy me, because the other side of the coin is a lot of people in this country have been so accustomed to not solving the problem that it's become part of the political culture. And that everybody is able to say that, of course, I would like a solution. I genuinely, honestly, Espen, I promise you I want a solution, but he doesn't. Or I would really like a solution, but of course it must be my solution. Because if I have to take his solution, and when I say his, it's because there are a lot of men in this game. If I take his solution, then I would prefer status quo. So we're not getting anywhere. So the stability and peace, which we thankfully enjoy in this beautiful island, thanks to, of course, restraint on both sides and the presence of UNFICYP, a quintessential, classical, first-generation peacekeeping operation that has been there for 50 years, almost as long as I've been around. By the way, as an anecdote, I'll tell you that in 1965, my father, he went here to study the peacekeeping mission, and he wrote a little book on, not on Cyprus, but on peacekeeping operations, but taking Cyprus, which was the hot new topic back then, 49 years ago, and that book was dedicated to me. I had forgotten about it, and he says something like, hope that little Espen will grow up in a world where these things are. So, I'm kind of still working. Work in progress. And so in a sense the paradox of Cyprus is that it's utterly and perfectly and completely solvable. There is nothing, I'm not belittling the differences, because there are real and genuine and honest disagreements, and where I do my very best to understand why and the history and the roots of the disagreements. But there's promise you, there is no other disagreement which cannot be solved with a doses of will and a doses of trust. So it's, while the devil is always in the detail in a sense, it's not really about the exact amount of territory to be returned or the exact pattern for how the property is organized in a new setting or the exact details of governance and power sharing. It is whether there is actually will to do it. And that's why I have now also over the last days been saying that without at all suggesting anything concrete, I think we may be approaching some kind of moment of truth where a real decision has to be made whether the Cypriots actually want to live together or whether they actually want to call it a day and do something else. I only have one mandate, which is to support, and the Security Council over the decades has expressed itself in one direction, which is unification. That's the only thing I'm going to do. I'm not going to do anything else. But I'm just saying that we shouldn't simply assume neither that the security situation will remain benign, a few minutes of flight from countries that are in flames and when hundreds of thousands of people are killed, and with the rise of the Islamic State and all the other things that are happening, nor should we assume that the international community will remain as aligned as it is today, nor, frankly, that great powers will spend so much time on trying to help the Cypriots to solve the problem. It may not last forever. So my appeal is, I'm not here to tell you what to think, but I'm here to say you may want to think now. And don't leave it all to your leaders, but think yourselves about what you want to do, and yourselves meaning not only individuals but organizations, as women's networks, that's business leaders, that's religious leaders, who, by the way, work very well together, and all kinds of civil society organizations, because I think I can say, with all respect, and I mean the respect, that the non-solution of the Cyprus problem is part of the political culture in this country, and it may not necessarily be solved along the normal political patterns. It may need a bigger push. So I'll end there just saying that there is an absolute clear relationship between the understanding of some major global trends, some major European developments, and the Cyprus issue, which is a very important issue, not only for Cypriots, but for all of us Europeans, because Europe is the only remaining divided country inside the EU. Now, we have many in Europe, but inside the EU. I've been both foreign minister and defense minister of my country, and the Cyprus issue has prevented a lot of progress when it comes to, for instance, NATO-EU cooperation. And, looking at the world around, maybe more EU-NATO cooperation could be good for all of us, given that there's a lot of things to look after out there where people are actually killing each other. But because of the eternal conflict between Greece and Turkey, largely over Cyprus, we're not able to get there. So it's a major theme in European affairs and international affairs, and it can be solved, but it has to be solved with a little help of our friends.
The UN Secretary-General's Special Advisor on Cyprus, Espen Barth Eide. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.